Rivals are a core aspect of the Pokemon video game franchise. Every game featuring at least one. And it may be controversial, but I think Hoenn is home to some of the greatest rivals we see in this franchise. Yes, Brendan, May, Wally, those ones. I'm talking about those ones. Now, you could say I'm blinded by nostalgia because I've played the Hoenn games for hundreds, if not thousands of hours in my life. But I genuinely believe these rivals teach children and taught me very valuable lessons about human nature and our purpose. These valuable lessons you don't find in games or shows or movies made for kids anymore. And so I'm here to tell you that these characters, through so little dialogue, teach us so much about ourselves. And I'm here to tell you just how they do that. I'm Flyboy, and you're watching my retrospective on what I think are some of the most overlooked, underrated, and best rivals we have gotten from Game Freak. The Silver Standard. Unfortunately, many believe that May, Wally, and Brendan are the beginning of the end for great rivals in the Pokemon series, which is kind of unfortunate when you think about it because it's only the third generation in the series. So why do people think these rivals aren't that great? Well, many reasons, but one of the main ones is they're not mean. Yes, mean. I wish I was kidding. Okay, that's a little reductionist, but there is some notion in the Pokemon fandom that for a rival to be good, they have to be an antagonistic force for the player character. You know, this is losing popularity in the fandom, and it's kind of because we haven't had a antagonistic rival for a while now. But of course, it only makes sense why this idea would catch on. The antagonistic archetype of the rival was what Blue and Silver, the first two rivals, were. And so of course it would be familiar to the fandom. Blue was a pretentious stuck-up, and Silver, well, he was criminal at times, and he really was antagonistic towards the player character. However, I'm here to say that just because it worked for Blue and Silver doesn't mean it's the way it has to be for rivals, and, you know, vice versa. Just because this sort of friendly rival works in Hoenn doesn't mean it always will work. May and Wally elevate what it means to be a rival in the Pokemon franchise. They are not there just to compete with the protagonist, but to grow alongside him. Now, this doesn't mean Silver and Blue don't grow as characters. I just mean this is where the emphasis lays in these ones. These characters all represent something we can learn about human nature. The player character, or who I will call Brendan throughout this if you haven't caught on yet, is an heir who is embracing his calling. May, or the rival, displays the struggles that come when our ambitions are misaligned with our purpose. And finally, Wally embodies what it means to rise above our limitations and achieve our true calling in our lives. As I've talked about earlier, this is not to discredit Blue or Silver as rivals. Again, this is just my argument for why I think May and Wally are extremely underrated rivals in this video game series. Brendan, the heir. I will be using Brendan as the stand-in for the protagonist, but May can be used, and they are interchangeable in these games. And yes, I know I'm talking about a protagonist and not a rival, but hang with me. I think it's important that we understand this character so we can better understand Wally and May, the rivals. Brendan's story is about a young man who is born with a lot of weight on his shoulders. His father, Norman, is a gym leader in the Hoenn League. It's clear from the beginning that there's a lot of pressure for Brendan to not only be a great trainer, but to become the champion, or one of the best. Brendan, faced with these crushing expectations, marches forward. The attributes that make a great trainer, or a great champion, Brendan grows and develops throughout the story. As you play through the Generation 3 games, you have lots of opportunities to not only capture Pokemon, but to train them, and this parallels with Lance, who had to train up these hard-to-train dragon types. You grow a unique tie to the legendaries of the region, just like Wallace. And you take on Team Magma and Team Aqua, just like Steven. In fact, in Emerald, you fight alongside him. Throughout the games, it's clear that Brendan is to become the next champion of the Hoenn region, and he does so unwaveringly. He takes on each successive gym leader, even his own father, and continues to become a better trainer. What we learn from Brendan is that some of us have a calling in our lives, and it's a calling that we ourselves desire. We may be born an heir, literally or metaphorically, that gives us a duty that we have to fulfill. And Brendan is here to inspire all the many types of heirs in this world. Whether it's a family business, an innate talent, or an actual birthright, you shouldn't be afraid to embrace your purpose and your destiny. From a Christian perspective, we want to live as Jesus Christ lived. And one of his greatest attributes is that he lived in this life knowing what he had to do and what his purpose was. He was to be the savior of all mankind, and he marched forward unwaveringly. And that attribute is something that Brendan also personifies. But enough with Brendan. I know this is a video on the rivals, so let's get into the actual rivals of the Hoenn region. May, the conflicted. Similar to Brendan, May is an heir of sorts. However, her father, Professor Birch, unlike Norman, is not a Pokemon gym leader, he's a Pokemon professor. And you know, the Pokemon professor, the one in every region you get your Pokemon from, it's not necessarily an illustrious role like a gym leader or a champion, but we'll see later that it's just as necessary. What makes May a different heir than Brendan is that her desires and her ambitions don't align with what her calling may be. And it's kind of adorable that she doesn't want to be a Pokemon professor from the beginning. It's kind of that sort of, teenage rebellion that kids have. But it is clear from the beginning that May wants to be a trainer just like you. In fact, when you first battle her, she says, "I'll give you a taste of what being a trainer is really like." And when she gives you Pokeballs after you defeated her, this is what she says. Take that as a bit of advice from a more experienced trainer like me. So obviously she is ambitious in becoming a trainer and insisting that she is one already, but the cracks in her ambitions and her talents begin to show very early on. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, there's a little mechanic where you can sneak up on Pokemon. And May shows you how to do it, and when you successfully do it, she says, "I've been at this way longer than you, and even I had a hard time sneaking up like that without being noticed." And May, as you talk to her, her focus seems to be on the gym leaders. She talks to you about her intentions to take on Norman, Roxanne, Watson, and even defeats Flannery before you. Heck, even on Route 110, her team does give you a little bit of difficulty. Just ask any Pokemon Ruby or Sapphire speedrunner. May desperately wants to beat Brendan in battle, to no avail. On Route 119 in Pokemon Emerald, you defeat May one more time, and you run into Scott, who says this, "Ha ha ha, way to go, Brendan. I just passed by a trainer riding a bike. You just beat that trainer, didn't you?" It was pretty obvious that you did. The kid looked really upset with a face all red from anger. May, when she talks to Brendan, or the player character, always has this facade of happiness. She's always happy when she talks to you. But really, this may just be a cover of her insecurity. She knows she's not as good as you as a trainer, even though that's her ambition. And there can only be one champion after all. Her being upset, and at this point even angry, shows that she wants so desperately to be a great trainer, but keeps falling further and further behind. Even candidly saying it, as a joke to be fair, in Sootopolis. "It seems like you just keep getting further and further ahead of me. I even started to feel like you'd gone somewhere that I can't even reach. It's pretty lonely, you know." Not? What would you think if I really said something like that? In Lily Cove, it becomes even more clear that May has begun to shift her ambition, saying, "Then while you're collecting your badges, I guess I'll go complete my Pokédex. I guess I'll be off then." Saying "I guess" twice shows this uncertainty, but it really shows here that she's distancing herself from the gym challenge, leaving that more up to the player character, while she goes on to pursue Pokemon research. And clearly May's story here is supposed to be a tragedy. She does everything, she fights every battle, she goes to every gym challenge just to fall further and further behind Brendan. So much so that she pivots into a life of being a Pokemon professor, just like her father. But is that so bad? I mean, does someone being the champion really deserve more dignity than someone being a Pokemon professor? In life, all of civilization is not just the individual, but the whole sum working together, no part being more important than the other. And we could go into even more detail about how Brendan himself couldn't be a champion without the professor to be there to give him his first Pokemon. Would Brendan be as effective as a trainer without the Pokédex that the Pokemon professor develops? And so whether we're looking at it specifically as a Pokemon professor, but as a whole, all of human life deserves dignity. And so May pivoting away from the illustrious role in life doesn't devalue her in any way. And this is a valuable lesson for kids to learn. Sometimes what we are called to do, what may be our destiny, isn't exactly what we want to do. But it doesn't mean that you're less valuable because you don't pursue that specific dream. You can see the tipping point is Route 119, where in her anger, she really did have to make a decision. Do I keep chasing Brendan and falling further and further behind? Or do I reevaluate what I should be doing in this life? And May's story here reminds me a lot of Jonah's story in the Old Testament. The Lord called Jonah to preach to the people of Nineveh, but he resisted. And what came from this resistance was a lot of suffering. He spent 3 days in the belly of a big fish until finally he repented himself and preached to the people. Just like Jonah, May suffered. She was angry. She felt lost when she kept pursuing the wrong goal and resisted her true destiny. But finally, she embraced her true calling in life to be a Pokemon professor. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire especially, we see she's pretty happy with that decision. Wally, the Ascendant. Now, Wally is quite a contrast when you compare him to May and Brendan. He doesn't seem to be an heir of much of anything. His parents weren't gym leaders, they weren't Pokemon professors, there's no special status he has, they're just normal people like most of us. When we first run into Wally, he's asking the protagonist and Norman, the father, to help him catch a Pokemon. Wally says that he wants this Pokemon so he's not as lonely when he moves to Verdanturf Town. With hindsight, however, this isn't the full truth. Wally does seem a little closed off and reserved at times, but he's never alone. Even in Petalburg, he had his parents, and in Verdanturf Town, he's got a lot of relatives living in that house with him. So what's up? Is Wally just a psychopathic liar? Not quite. While Wally's motivation to get a Pokemon could in part be so he's not as lonely, his true intentions are to become a Pokemon trainer. However, we see that his family is very protective of him, almost overprotective of him, and discourage him from pursuing this dream. Part of this is because Wally does have a sickness. He has some sort of asthma or breathing problem, which is why he is moving to Verdanturf Town, because of course there's cleaner air there. Because of all this, instead, Wally keeps his ambitions close to his heart, and he seems very drawn to this ambition. We see in his room in Petalburg City lots of books about Pokemon training and battling covered in sticky notes. It seems like Wally deep down knew that this was his calling in life, that he was to become a Pokemon trainer. He just didn't share it. However, his struggle isn't just external. It's not just overcoming his sickness. It's not just overcoming his overprotective family. There's something internal to this. Wally, while catching his Ralts, seems very, very uncertain, almost like he doesn't know what he's doing, which we clearly know he does with all those books. This is that internal struggle I'm talking about. Does Wally even know if he can achieve this ambition? Does he really know whether this is his calling in life, or is it just a fever dream? And how often do we, just as Wally, lie about our true intentions on what we're doing to avoid scorn, to avoid another lecture about how we can't do something? Wally not telling the full truth to Norman and Brendan isn't because he's a pathological liar or anything. He's just like you and me. Maybe he doesn't want to bear the embarrassment if he goes and tells everyone, I want to be a Pokemon trainer, and it ends up not happening. Like I said earlier, Wally's journey here isn't just one of overcoming externalities, like his sickness or his family. This is truly a journey about someone overcoming their own certainty and achieving their goals despite the limitations. Let's look at what happens when we run into Wally one more time in Mauville City. He's standing outside of the gym and wants to prove to his uncle that he's a stronger trainer, and he wants to challenge Watson. He challenges us instead, and you defeat his soul helpless level 16 Ralts. And it's honestly soul crushing when you see his dialogue. It's just silence, and then I lost. However, this brutal defeat is not what Wally is defined by. What he's defined by is how he reacts to this defeat. The next time you talk to him, he says, I lost to you, Brendan, but I'm not feeling down anymore because I have a new purpose in life. Together with my Ralts, I'm going to challenge Pokemon gyms and become a great trainer. Please watch me, Brendan. I'm going to be stronger than you. When I do, I'm going to challenge you to another battle. And that's it until we face Wally one more time in Victory Road. And a lot of people's complaints about Wally as a rival is we don't see enough of his progression. And to that I say, that's the point. When we spend our days nose to the grindstone, grinding and grinding to achieve our goals, does anyone really see that? Wally's story reminds us of this truth. No one sees the struggle, everyone sees the results. While Brendan and May's story, they happen in the limelight, Wally's happens in the shadows. Just like many of us, his struggle against his limitations, the people telling him no, the uncertainty and the doubt, all happens unseen. When we find Wally at the end of Victory Road, by the way, he got there before you, the player character, we see the results of this hard work. He says to you, "It was only because I lost to you back then that I could become even stronger." When you compare this reaction to May's reaction of anger, it really shows you why Wally was truly destined to become a great trainer. Wally exudes outcome independence, a great lesson for people to know. That regardless of what happens, whether you win or whether you lose, you can only get better. That's what makes a good competitor. And almost poetically, you see Wally's once weak and frail Ralts that couldn't even deal damage become this amazing Mega Gallade. Just like how Wally went from a weak, defenseless trainer to one of the all-time greats. And from a Christian perspective, just as Joseph, who was sold into slavery, being a lowly slave of Potiphar, overcame all of this and became a great king of Egypt. Wally defines how life really is for most of us. We all have our limitations, our setbacks, voices in our ear telling us no. And a lot of us have embarrassing moments like Wally did in front of the Mauville gym. However, when we are certain of our calling in life and we are ambitious about it, being faithful every single day, it's only a matter of time before we're victorious. In the end, rivalry in Pokemon, at least from Wally and May, isn't just about competition. It's about the paths in life we take, the struggles we face, and ultimately, the purpose that we find. For Brendan, it came a little easier. He was always meant to be champion. He just had to put his nose to the grindstone. May, on the other hand, had to struggle and find out what her true calling was in life. A calling that wasn't expected, but no less worthy of dignity than Brendan's. And Wally proved that when we do have a purpose in life, there is nothing, no sickness, and no internal doubt that can stop us from getting there. And in that way, even though there's only one champion in Hoenn, they all end up being their own champion in their own unique way. Now, could I be reading way too into these children's games from like 2003? Maybe. But you know what? What's the point in taking everything at face value? Isn't that just boring? I'm playing these games for like hundreds of hours. At some point, I'm gonna have to think about it a little bit. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to hit that like button. Also, if you enjoyed this type of video, this more sort of character analysis, make sure to hit that subscribe button as well to let me know. And don't forget to comment below your thoughts on not only the video, but what you think about the rivals in Hoenn as well. Are they your favorite? Why? Why not? And don't forget to share this with all the close ones in your lives that are Pokemon fans. And I know you have some. There's too many Pokemon fans for you not to know one. But that'll do it for me. Again, I'm Flyboy, and until next time, peace.